What's up guys, welcome to the Micah group presentation video. If you're watching this in YouTube, because I'm going to post this in YouTube, I'm going to separate the video in sections, so if you want to skip to a different section that you're really interested in concerning the book of Micah, then go right ahead and skip to the video. But this video will be very different because me and my classmates, we were assigned a group presentation project where we were assigned a specific minor prophet in the minor prophets, and we chose to do Micah. And so in this video you're going to see the historical context of the prophetic book of Micah, the issues and themes of the prophetic book, today's relevancy, and its New Testament usage. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and if you're watching this by YouTube, please subscribe. It helps me a lot, and I hope you find this video very informative. So sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and enjoy this video. Hello, welcome to a brief section of history. And I'm your host, Angel, and I'm going to cover the history part of Micah. We're going to view the historical context briefly for the northern kingdom, but we're mainly going to focus on the southern kingdom because although Micah does mention Samaria and its destruction, I mean, he's really centered in the southern kingdom of Judah, and his message is mainly to both parties, but specifically the southern kingdom of Judah. And so we're going to start by introducing to this information. Micah began his ministry during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Some would say approximately in 750 BC, but if you want to be a little bit sure, it's in the 8th century. So Micah is an 8th century prophet. He's prophesying in the southern kingdom of Judah, and he's also contemporaries with Isaiah, Amos, and Hosea in the 8th century as well. I want to just briefly discuss the history of the northern kingdom, although they're not that important, but they're important. So in the 10th century, we have Jeroboam I. He's evil. So this guy introduces idolatry in the northern kingdom. Next up, we have Omri, who establishes stability in the northern kingdom. He makes Samaria its capital, and Samaria is mentioned in Micah, so that's why I'm mentioning this. So we're gonna go to 8th century, where we're gonna really be focusing on, because Micah's from 8th century. So we got Jeroboam I. He's reigning in 786 to 746. It's a prosperous time during Jeroboam II's reign. There is territorial advancements, the kingdom experiencing prosperity, as well as the southern kingdom of Judah that also are experiencing a golden age. So Jeroboam II and I think Jotham are contemporary kings. They both share a golden age where the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are experiencing both territorial advancements, trade routes, and all that stuff. After Jeroboam, however, things aren't going very good. After Jeroboam II, there's great instability into the northern kingdom of Israel because so these guys, they're pretty bad guys, and we want to include, the Assyrian Empire because they play a pretty big role. The Assyrians in 744 BC are under Tiglath-Pileser, and Tiglath-Pileser be like, you know what, guys, let's go and pull up against the northern kingdom of Israel. Let's expand our territory because we need the Levant region, we need the trade routes, we want to get wealthy. The Assyrians under Tiglath-Pileser in 744 BC decide to come down to the Levant region, and they're like, hey, northern kingdom of Israel, we actually want to take control of your land and we want to put you under tribute. That is the relevancy of Samaria. We're just giving a brief history over that because it's mainly focused to southern kingdom of Judah.
A few moments later.
Alrighty, so we got the southern kingdom now. In the 10th century, we have Solomon. Now this guy, he's a crazy dude. The kingdom was getting wealthy, and he introduces idolatry to the southern kingdom. He's to blame for the division of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom because he decides to marry pagan women. He did this because of his many alliances with the other countries, and because he was so prosperous, very rich, he allied himself with all the pagan nations, and so he married a lot of women, over 700 women. Can you believe that? After Solomon, Rehoboam, the glory that was in the southern kingdom under Solomon is really not present during Rehoboam's reign because This guy gets invaded by Shishak, king of Egypt, ransacks Jerusalem. All the gold that Solomon stored in the house of the temple of the Lord carries off to Tanis in Egypt. And so, yeah, this is not very great for the southern kingdom right now. And as we look into the 9th century, it's relatively has some good and bad kings. So it's kind of a mixture. So we have, for example, some good kings are Asa, Jehoshaphat, and Joash, which brings stability to the southern kingdom. But there's some bad kings like Abijah and Jeroboam and even a queen. What the heck? Their rulership brings instability to the southern kingdom of Judah. And so we want to focus on Joash now. So Joash, he brings stability to the southern kingdom, which is pretty good. Almost 40-year reign, which is crazy. He is a good king under Jehoiada the priest. So he was under the direction of a godly priest, so that's why he's a godly man. He leads the southern kingdom into stability. Now we get to the 8th century of the southern kingdom of Judah. We have kings like Amaziah, Uzziah, and Jotham, pretty godly kings. Their rulership is pretty stable until we get to Ahaz. This guy's a pretty bad guy. He's a bad king because he reintroduces idolatry into the land. And not only that, Tiglath-Pileser III in Assyria, they were just campaigning against the Levant region, and they wanted to take some pieces of land. They wanted to control this area to expand their kingdom and to get rich. And so that's where they attacked. You see this map right here. We have arrows, and they're busting their way into the northern kingdom. They basically took it over. They managed to get to the southern kingdom. Guess what Ahaz did? He allied himself with the Assyrians so that they wouldn't destroy him. As a result, the southern kingdom is now under tribute under Ahaz's reign. So both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom went under Assyrian control, and they had to pay tribute or else they would be skinned alive. The Assyrians were pretty gruesome in their punishments. Also, the superscription in Micah mentions he was active also in Hezekiah. So we're gonna mention Hezekiah just briefly. After Ahaz, who was a bad king, we have Hezekiah, who is actually a great king, and he destroys all the pagan gods that Ahaz installed in the southern kingdom of Judah. He rebels against Assyria. He is a king who really trusts in Yahweh that he could provide. In 722, the northern kingdom is destroyed because the capital of Samaria is besieged under Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II completes the siege, and so our northern kingdom deleted out of the map. Micah briefly mentions Samaria's rebellion against God of the northern kingdom since Jeroboam I, and prophesies Samaria's destruction, which happened in 722 BC by the Assyrians. And that, my friends, is the history of the prophet Micah.
Hey guys, my focus today will be on the themes of Micah that I have found. So the first one is covenantal justice. The second one is corruption and false religion. The third one is judgment and restoration. While the fourth and final one is messianic hope, or the hope of a coming Messiah. The first theme of Micah is covenantal justice. Micah's main goal was to call people back to Yahweh and for them to follow Yahweh's commandments. Micah 6:8 says, "What does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" Micah is framed with the imagery of a lawsuit, where God brings his people to trial to expose how ungrateful they have been to him. For Micah, true worship must include social justice. Religion and ethics are inseparable. We cannot separate those. He viewed economic injustice, such as the misuse of land and oppression of peoples, not just as social problems, but as spiritual rebellion and violations of the covenant. His moral critique was deeply rooted in his theology. The second theme of Micah is corruption and false religion. Micah strongly condemned the corruption and false religion that was going on among the leaders of Judah. He directed harsh words to the leaders, the priests, and the prophets, who abhorred justice and perverted all equity, which comes from Micah 3:9. Their specific crimes included land exportation, bribery, using fake weights in business to gain a profit. Micah particularly spoke for the small landowners who were being affected by this corruption, that they were being deprived of their inheritance. He also attacked Jerusalem's false confidence that the presence of the temple guaranteed their safety. Micah gave a dramatic warning that Zion shall be plowed as a field in Micah 3:12, which strike hard at this false hope that they had at the time. The third theme of Micah is judgment and restoration. Micah's book goes back and forth between oracles of doom and oracles of hope, creating a rhythm of ruin and renewal. The mix of doom and gloom oracles are for two different audiences. The doom articles are for the oppressors who are warned of coming destruction, while the oracles of hope are for the oppressed who are giving hope. These would be the remnant of Yahweh, the people who are still following after Yahweh even though everyone else has turned from them. Fourth and final theme of Micah is messianic hope. In Micah 5:2-4, it talks about a king who is yet to come from Bethlehem, who is the hope for the remnant people of Judah. This king is a ruler and a shepherd who leads with strength, care, and faithfulness. The New Testament talks about this hope. In Matthew, he cites Micah to show that Jesus' birth fulfills his promise. And Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, which also echoes Micah. Micah's hope for the future is a restored people living under God as a righteous king. Lasting peace requires renewed righteousness. And the Messiah brings both. A king who purifies, restores, and leads God's people into the life God intended.
Hey guys, this is Noah. I'm going to be talking about the issues within Micah. When looking closely at the book of Micah, we find that a number of significant issues or tensions emerge within the text. These issues primarily revolve around an apparent lack of unity, which becomes visible when we examine both its literary style and composition, as well as the historical circumstances surrounding the prophet himself. Scholars have long noticed that the book does not present itself as a simple, single-voice document. Instead, it feels like a collection of messages shaped by different contexts and possibly even different hands. This raises important questions about how the book developed over time and how we should understand its message today. To begin with, Micah has traditionally been identified as a prophet of doom. This label comes from the strong presence of judgment oracles within the book, messages that emphasize God's wrath, the consequences of injustice, and the coming destruction that awaits the people if they continue in their current path. However, despite this reputation, a substantial portion of Micah contains surprisingly hopeful material. We encounter vivid promises of restoration, visions of peace, and reassurances of God's compassion and covenant faithfulness. For many readers, this mixture of judgment and hope seems unexpected, even contradictory. Because of this contrast, some scholars argue that the hopeful passages may not have come from Micah at all. This observation has led to discussions about possible additional authorship or editorial work. The presence of these hopeful sections points to material that may have been added before or after Micah's time by later editors or disciples. These individuals may have expanded the book to bring it in line with new historical circumstances, or to emphasize theological themes that the community found important. Some argue that only the first 3 chapters represent the authentic words of the historical Micah. This perspective does not diminish the book's value, but it does challenge us to think about how prophetic books were preserved and shared. This argument is supported not only by thematic differences, but also by the book's literary style. The shifts in tone, vocabulary, and structure seem to suggest a setting outside Micah's own ministry. It is important to note that these theories do not represent a scholarly consensus. They offer one possible way of understanding the book's complexity, but many scholars and theologians continue to defend its unity. They argue that the diversity within the book reflects how prophetic messages shift in style and purpose, and point to its variety rather than multiple authors. In other words, They work actively to maintain Micah's unity, pushing back against the claims made by the opposing viewpoint. Even if there appears to be a lack of continuity at first, especially because Micah contains both sharp condemnation and uplifting visions of restoration, there are ways to read the book as a cohesive whole. The shifts in theme may actually arise from a dynamic and diverse theology, one that seeks to express the fullness of God's character, rather than focusing exclusively on judgment or mercy. Prophets often moved fluidly between warning and promise, because their goal was not merely to predict disaster, but to call the community back to covenant faithfulness. From this perspective, the book's diversity becomes a strength rather than a flaw. It reveals a theological richness that captures both divine justice and divine compassion. Nevertheless, we should acknowledge that the possibility of a later editorial expansion remains open. Yet such editing would not erase the core prophetic message that aligns consistently with Micah's concerns: justice, humility, and faithfulness to God. Another issue that arises when studying the book is Micah's relationship with the prophet Isaiah. Both prophets shared the same oracle: "Out of Zion shall go forth the law." The presence of this shared prophecy suggests that their messages were part of a broader oral tradition circulating in Judah at the time. It was common for prophets to draw upon one another's teachings, especially when addressing similar crises. However, the challenge comes from the remarkable differences in their social backgrounds. Isaiah was associated with the royal court. He operated with high society, advising kings and interacting with the elite. Micah, on the other hand, was a rural southerner, a figure who spoke from the perspective of ordinary people, particularly the oppressed, who suffered under unjust political and economic structures. These contrasting social positions could have produced messaging that directly opposed one another. Yet, rather than weakening their relationship or producing conflicting theological messages, these differences seem to have enriched their prophetic witness. Each prophet, in his own way, affirmed the same vision of God's law extending from Zion to guide the people.
All right, ready? And action.
Hey, I heard you've been taking a class on the minor prophets. How's that going?
Yeah, I'm actually working on wrapping up a group project on Micah right now, and it's been pretty interesting.
Oh, cool. What's been the most relevant thing to you?
Well, it's actually really impressive how much the minor prophets have to say about the way we live today, even when we're so far past and beyond their original audience. But especially when it comes to Micah, like his message really centers around Micah 6:8, which is, I'm sure you've heard it many times, but the command to Israel to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with their God.
Sounds like a good command to Christians even today. And what do you think that really means?
Yeah, it is interesting to look into the words because at face value you can't always tell, but the first command is to act justly. So seeking justice, we've learned in the Old Testament, is something that God deeply cares about. And so, yeah, you're right. We should definitely know what that means. And it seems that the Bible presents justice firstly as an action by God, and secondly, an act of human participation within God's work. And so primarily justice is making things how God would want them to be, or right, which is where the word righteousness comes from. And most often he refers to the all-encompassing care of those who can't care for themselves. More often than not, referenced as widows, orphans, the poor, and things like that. Yeah, and reading these books and reading Micah especially is really made me think about how often I seek to care for those around me, care for those who are less fortunate, and how often I ask God to show me where he needs me to deeply care for people. And so the people in Israel practice all these right rituals to appease God, but their care and their listening to God was pretty much non-existent. And they thought just the religious actions would save them and make God pleased with them. And I see that a lot today in the world and in myself, of just doing the religious functions with no real care or attention to God, but more of so just a hope that going to church and throwing money in organizations would make us right with God. We have to internalize that true worship really comes not from ritual, but from following God and caring for who he cares for.
That helps me understand justice, I think, a little bit more. But so then what does loving mercy mean? Is that just Jesus' mercy to us?
It's actually a great question. So loving mercy does absolutely come from the example that God sets for us, primarily where we see through Jesus. But really, what he's referencing so much more here is the word It's a fun Hebrew word to say, chesed. And it's a complete and steadfast loving kindness. And so it really means to pursue walking a life of reliable faithfulness to God and His Word, and to seek forgiveness instead of revenge in our communication with each other, in our relationship with God Himself. And to pursue sacrifice instead of selfishness. Sacrifice in the way we treat others, sacrifice in the way that we give to God portions of, not portions, but all of who we are. Which is really, as you said, the same message that Jesus preached, and the same things that we're called to pursue right now in the present age of Christianity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then it ends in humility, right? And which people often think of just as like rejection of self.
Right.
And what is he actually calling for there?
Right, yeah. Well, I love that Micah uses the verbiage of walking in humility or pursuing humility while walking with God, because really it was a Hebrew image of like being a certain way or pursuing a performance. So it was like a way of life and an act of life, and that was, he used walking in that scenario. So we are called to walk through life, and on that walk, humility is really two things in that walk. It's pursuing wisdom, and it's being attentive to the others walking next to us. And so if we seek wisdom or the thoughts of God, then we will naturally and obviously know our frame and our perspective in relation to God, which makes us humble. And while we're also seeking to lift up those around us, that also adds to the humility that God is calling us to. And so in order to do this, we must first pursue this walk with God, because He's the God of transformative well-being, is what one author says. And so we can only really walk in humility if we're transformed by Him, because otherwise we can't find humility by ourselves.
I always like to think of that walking as that cadence, and not just that point in time thing, but it's really just our rhythm of how we actually continually walk forward. And so that's cool. It sounds like you're learning a lot in Micah and the minor prophets, and it's pretty relevant to all of us still today.
Yeah, just as God calls the Israelites to justice, mercy, and humility, He calls us right now and right here to a life of complete justice, complete mercy, and complete humility.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, good call. Cool.
Yeah.
So the New Testament actually uses a couple of passages from the book of Micah, and we're going to examine two main references that are found in the New Testament that reference the book of Micah. And so the first one, and the most notable one of all, is Matthew 2:6, where Matthew references Micah chapter 5, verses 2 and 4 to reference the messianic prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And it reads as follows: "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Matthew uses this passage in the context of when King Herod seeks the scribes and the elders of Jerusalem to figure out where the heck the Messiah is going to be born. And so they provide this scripture in Micah 5 verses 2 and 4, which reveal that the messianic shepherd, or this messianic king, would be born in Bethlehem. And so this prophecy is fulfilled in Jesus, and that is one reference of the book of Micah in the Old Testament. The second reference of the book of Micah in the New Testament is in Matthew chapter 10 verses 34 through 37. In this specific context, Jesus is using Micah 7:6 to explain to his disciples that he did not come on the earth to bring peace among men, but he came to bring a sword, or essentially a division between those who follow God and those who do not follow God. And so he words this like this: "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. The man's enemy will be the members of his own household." However, in its original context, Micah uses this passage to describe how a son dishonors his father, and a daughter rises up against her mother-in-law, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. So the original context is basically Micah describing how the southern kingdom of Israel is so corrupt that a son is dishonoring or disobeying his father, and there is tension between family members as well, so there is no peace between them. However, Jesus uses a new meaning to this passage, which is very interesting. So these are the two major references that we can find of Micah in the New Testament.